in the Congress to support this very important bill to help them carry out that important mission. And I do so and I yield back at this time the balance of my time. Thank you very much.
Gentleman yields back. All time for general debate has expired. Under the roll, the committee rises.
And then you're going to report back. Go down there.
Okay, gotcha. Mr. Speaker, the Committee of the Whole House on the State of the Union, having had under consideration H.R. 4310, directs me to report that it has come to no resolution thereon.
The Chair of the Committee of the Whole House on the State of the Union reports that the committee has had under consideration H.R. 4310 and has come to no resolution thereon. The Chair will entertain requests for 1-minute speeches. For what purpose does the gentleman from Pennsylvania seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, request unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute, revise and extend.
Without objection. You are recognized.
Mr. Speaker, President Obama has often claimed that we have 2% of the world's proven oil reserves, which is nothing but an excuse for inaction on developing American-made energy. As the Washington Post fact-checker noted, the President's claim, in quote, is true but false. False because proven oil reserves is only one category of oil, a fraction of the overall oil in the ground. Proven reserves refers to amounts of oil where seismic studies have identified available resources. Due to the long presidential and congressional bans on outer continental shelf development, the inventory of resources have not been tracked in over 30 years. The U.S. Geological Survey and the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management estimates the U.S. has a 16% share of the world's undiscovered, technically recoverable conventional oil resources. The Middle East also has a 16% share. Rather than saying that what we can't do, the President should be doing more to facilitate the safe discovery and development of U.S. resources. Mr. Speaker, the President says he supports, quote, an all-the-above strategy for the 21st century that develops every source of American-made energy. The question now is whether he's willing to prove it. And I yield back. Thank you.
Gentleman's time has expired. For what reason does the gentlelady from California rise?
Mr. Speaker, I rise to engage.
Gentlelady will suspend. Are there further requests for 1-minute speeches? Under the Speaker's announced policy of January 5th, 2011, the gentlelady from California, Mrs. Spire, is now recognized for 60 minutes as the designee of the minority leader. And the gentlelady is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, thank you very much for the opportunity. I'm going to be joined during this hour by my good friend and colleague from California, Congressman John Garamendi. I would like to just begin this discussion on oil prices by recalling that in 2008, the refrain that was heard in this chamber over and over again was, drill, baby, drill. And it was a constant refrain by my colleagues on the Republican side. And the good news is that that's precisely what we've done. In fact, in the USA Today, Citigroup analysts are quoted as saying in a recent report, quote, energy independence is no pipe dream. The U.S. is already the world's fastest growing oil and natural gas producer. Counting the output from Canada and Mexico, North America is the new Middle East. So, it's interesting to note that as much as we've been wringing our hands, there is oil being produced here in the United States. In fact, a lot of oil is being produced in the United States, and we're going to go over a few charts now to show how, in fact, things are looking a little bit better. But first, this first chart really shows what happened with oil production. When George Bush was still the President of the United States, the price of gas hit $4.10 a gallon. It was very high. And then gas prices hit rock bottom when President Obama took office because of the global financial crisis that hit. When President Obama took office, there were fewer than 400 oil rigs operating in the United States, falling below 200 rigs by mid-2009. Then, despite safety reviews after the BP spill, oil rigs operating in the United States quadrupled over the next 3 years. There are now more than 1,300, I repeat that, 1,300 oil rigs operating in the United States, more than all operational oil drilling in the rest of the world combined. So, in the last 3 years of the Bush administration, we were producing 1.78 billion barrels of oil, but the first 3 years of the Obama administration, we have already produced 2 billion barrels of oil. The U.S. oil production has continued to increase under President Obama and is now at an 8-year high. So, Jim Bruckford, who is the Cambridge Energy Research Associates Managing Director, said in Senate testimony in February of this year, and I quote, "A great revival in U.S. oil production is taking shape." So, for all the hand-wringing, for all my colleagues on the other side of the aisle talking about what isn't being done, the truth is a lot is being done. And we now have more oil rigs operating in the United States, some 1,300, than all the other places in the world combined. BP projects that the U.S. will get 94% of its energy domestically by the year 2030. That's going to be a huge benefit for all of us. Economists at Citigroup argue that North America can be energy independent by 2020. That's only 8 years away. We can be energy independent by 2020. Citigroup says if that happens, we will create 3.6 million new jobs. We will see the unemployment rate cut by 2%. And an interesting example is that of North Dakota. Do you know what the unemployment rate is in North Dakota today? It's 3%. In California, it's 11%. In North Dakota, it's 3%. And North Dakota can now boast having the lowest unemployment rate in the country, and it is now the 4th largest oil producer in the country as well. So we create new jobs, we reignite manufacturing and chemical businesses, and guess what? American families see a lot of savings too. In fact, the price of natural gas has dropped substantially. And if we keep going the way we're going, it will drop some 80%, giving the American family a $926 a year savings. Georgia Power is another great example. Their fuel costs dropped 19%, and guess what? All of their utilities customers saw a decrease in their electrical costs, in their utility bills, of some 6%. So there is some good news in all of that. The second chart, and then I'll have my good friend Mr. Garamendi join in. The second chart looks at U.S. oil production versus gas volatility. World market factors are really driving up oil prices. And if you look at this particular chart, you see that the oil production stays pretty much the same. Goes up a little bit in 2010, as you can see, but for the most part, it stays pretty consistent. But what does change, and change dramatically, up and down, as if you're reading an EKG, is the price of gas in this country. So gas prices are going up and down irrespective of the production of oil. The Associated Press conducted an investigation of the past 36 years of U.S. oil production and gas prices and found that there is no statistical correlation between how much oil comes out of the U.S. wells and the price of the pump. More U.S. drilling has not changed how deeply the gas pump drills into your wallet. And we know that. The price of oil is determined on a global market. More oil production in the United States does not mean consistently lower prices at the pump. However, if we become less dependent on foreign oil, we will see some dramatic shifts take place in this country. So, why does more drilling have so little effect on gas prices? The answer is because oil is a global commodity. The United States owns less than 2% of the global reserves and pays the same world market price that everyone else does. So, with that, let me introduce my good friend, Congressman John Garamendi from the great area of Sacramento and the Valley.
Thank you very much, Congresswoman Spear, and thank you for bringing this very, very important issue to the attention of the American public this evening as we spend this hour talking about gas prices in the United States. I was really struck by the charts that you put up as to, wow, but they tell us that the story is we don't pump oil in America. Not so. We do. We really do. And they tell us that we're going the wrong direction. But if you take a look at those charts, we're actually producing more and more energy. Today in the Resources Committee, on which I have the honor of sitting, we had a debate about this, and our Republican colleagues were saying that we're not producing as much, and so we show them the Energy Institute's statistics, and they say they're wrong. I said, well, that's an independent agency, and they collect the statistics, and in fact, they're right, and your charts clearly pointed out that we are, in fact, making it in America. This is my favorite chart. This is what I'm often on the floor talking about, manufacturing in America and making in America. It's not often that we take this subject of making our energy in America, building an American energy machine, one that will supply the energy that our nation needs to meet a growing economy and the needs of our society. So very, very much what we're talking about here is making it in America. There's so many different pieces to this. I'm going to just bring up two of those, and then we'll carry on our dialogue here. First of all, conservation. I think you're going to talk about this a little later, about automobile conservation, the gasoline in automobiles. Very, very important, but there's so much other conservation that we must be doing in housing, in commercial buildings, in this building. I mean, this building is over 150 years old. We've got serious conservations or lack of energy conservations here within the nation's capital. But if we carry on a major effort on conservation, we will reduce our expenses and simultaneously make the available energy that is currently available much more widely available and at a lower cost because of the market forces. So conservation is absolutely critical, not only in oil and gas, but in all of the other energy that we consume in this nation. Now, one of the things, the second thing, and then I'm circle back around on them quickly, is what I call substitution. We can substitute energy forms for oil, and in doing so, increase our domestic availability for oil, and that's diesel and gasoline. And in the substitution, we also reduce our importation of oil. So substitution is really important. So what is substitution? Well, substitution is going electric. We can go to electric cars. We go to hybrids, which are a combination of electric and gasoline. There are many different ways in the transportation sector, but oil is also used in the production of electricity. Now, natural gas is the big thing today, and it is a wonderful substitution for coal. And we'll come back to that. And finally, biofuels. The point I want to do here leads me to this little chart that I've used before, and it talks about where your tax money's going. Where is your tax money going? Well, I'll tell you that about $5 billion of your tax money every year goes to the oil industry. Goes to the oil industry to provide a subsidy that's now been in place for more than a century. And in doing so, worked. Hey, that subsidy worked. It created one of the wealthiest industry, well, not one of, the wealthiest industry in the entire world. That's the oil industry. And again, I know you're going to pick this up and carry it a little bit further, but just here, our subsidies, our tax dollars, handed over $5 billion a year to the big five who earn billions and billions of dollars of profit every quarter. Why do we continue to do that when we really starve the substitutions? You look at here, this is the biofuel area. These are the green technologies, wind, solar energy, biofuels. This is ethanol down here. You just compare this. The subsidies, some $70 billion a year going to coal and oil. That's well beyond the big five. And over here on this side, we're talking about some $12 billion, and down here some $16 billion a year. So what's happened is that your tax money continues to subsidize oil and coal, and just a little teeny tiny bit on the substitutions where the opportunity for real energy independence will exist. So we should keep this in mind as we look at how we use your tax dollars. Now, there's a huge fight going on here in the Congress, appropriately so, about changing this substitution, that we ought to stop subsidizing the oil industry, put some of that money over here into the substitutes, that is the green technologies, and into paying off our deficit or taking care of our seniors and our sick. Much, much more to be done on that. I'd love to see your charts, and then we'll get into this thing in some hopefully elegant way.
All right. The next chart that we're going to put up is one that you'll find particularly interesting. This is the big five oil companies and how much money they made just in 2011. And as you can see, $137 billion last year, a 75% increase in the profits over the year before. And as you can see, each of them, ExxonMobil, a 31% increase, Shell, 54, BP, 114% increase, Chevron, 42%, ConocoPhillips, 9%. These companies are doing extraordinarily well, and yet we're still giving them $4 billion in subsidies, $5 billion in subsidies a year. And I guess the question I have for you, Congressman, is one of the things that we're told is, by the industry often enough, is that if you take away our subsidies, the cost of gas at the pump is going to go up. And what is the answer to that question?
Well, you have another chart there that showed the oil that is pumped and the price of gasoline. If you put that one back up, well, maybe I'll just come up and grab it. Congresswoman Spear, you used this before, and you asked me, if we take away the subsidies, will it increase the cost of gasoline? The answer is categorically no. First of all, it is an international market that sets the price of gasoline. I should add one little caveat to that: international market and speculation. And I'm going to come to the speculation a little bit. But anyway, the international market sets the price of gasoline that these five big companies buy and the value of the oil that they extract. So the barrel of oil is set internationally. Now, if it's set internationally and it remains, you take out the speculation, it remains fairly constant. Here's the production, and it has gone up, but it's been rather steady over this period of time. So it's not the subsidy. Let me start at a different place. The subsidy is to encourage the production of oil. Well, they've had the subsidy, and so the production's been rocking along here. The price of oil set internationally. What explains this enormous variation in the price of fuel at the pump? Well, it's not production. That's from here. Is it the subsidies? The subsidies are a very, very small part. You're looking at that at $137 billion total profit. The subsidy is $5 billion. So it's inconceivable that the subsidy has much to do with the bottom line, other than adding $5 billion, which would be, I guess if you took the subsidy out, it'd be $132 billion. Oh my, let's whine about that. I don't think so. So the subsidy doesn't have much to do, if anything, with the price of gasoline. The price of gasoline, however, is set by those companies. And that leads directly to that bottom line there, $137 billion. They choose to set that price. Now, what are we going to do about it? Well, take the subsidies back and begin to move away from dependence on oil, whether that's imported oil or oil that is pumped out of the ground here in the United States. Move to these alternatives. Move to the alternatives, electricity, natural gas, and the biofuels. All of those will further reduce the demand for oil, which will bring down the cost of a barrel of oil within this country and around the world, and in so doing, allow us to have a lower gasoline price, and to do that, capture the subsidies. It's not going to increase the cost of a gallon of gasoline at all.
So we know that we're pumping more oil out of the ground in this country right now than ever before in our history, more than that's being pumped anywhere else in the world, 1,300 oil rigs. We know that we're still giving the industry a huge subsidy, and we know they're making lots of money, right? So what is going on? Is there, in fact, speculation? Is that driving the price of gas up? Now, Bart Chilton, who's the Commodities Future Trading Commissioner, recently said that consumers are now paying what amounts to a Wall Street premium every time they fill up their car with gas. In fact, he says, every time you fill up your Honda Civic, you're paying a $7.50 Wall Street tax, in effect. You're paying that because of the speculation that's going on in the market. If your car is a Ford Explorer, you're actually paying an extra $10.41. So over the course of a year, it turns into real money. You're now talking about $700 more a year that we're paying because Wall Street speculation is driving this price. Now, we've asked the Justice Department on 3 different occasions. The President of the United States has asked the Justice Department on 3 different occasions to look into, to investigate the speculators. And we're waiting. I think we're waiting for that particular review to take place because what we do know is that if we can get gas down to get oil down to $70 a barrel, we're going to bring gas down to $3 a gallon, which will be a huge benefit to the consumers in this country.
The speculation issue, this morning we had a fellow from the Connecticut Petroleum Retailers Association come in and talk to us about speculation. You and I didn't have enough time to put this together. We talked about this beforehand because we were both taken by the information that he provided. It's really not new information, but it is very interestingly put on the issue of speculation. Forgive me, general public, and forgive me, Ms. Spear, but this, I just decided to put this together on the back of this Make It in America chart because America was taken to the cleaners in 2008, and this is what happened in the price of a barrel of oil in 2008. Now, keep in mind, in 2008, there was the wars were going on, but there was no real change in the wars. In March of 2008, a barrel of oil cost $70 a barrel in the United States, and I guess worldwide also. So March of 2008, it was $70 a barrel. Nothing happened. No big change. No, the Straits of Hormuz were not shut down. Venezuela and Iraq and not Iraq, but Nigeria and other countries continue to pump oil as they had before. But between March of 2008 and July of 2008, what's that, 4 months, 5 months? The price went from $70 a barrel to $147, and gasoline was very close to $5 a gallon. So oil went from 70 to 147, doubled in price in just a period of time from March, April, May, June until July of 2008. And then the speculators broke and the price plummeted between July to November to $32 a barrel. Now, this has nothing to do with the production of oil around the world, has nothing to do with major international crises of any way. Obviously, we had a problem in the United States with our economy, but the consumption of gasoline remained about the same, but the price of a barrel of oil doubled, and then in the same year, July to November, plummeted to $32 a barrel. If there's ever a situation that says somebody's speculating in this market. It's this extraordinary change that occurred over a period of time from March to July to November. And there's no supply and demand, no international crisis that could even begin to explain this extraordinary shift in prices. It is, I think, beyond a doubt that all of this was the great gasoline crisis of 2008, was caused by speculation. Now, we need to do something about that. And here's an issue before the House of Representatives, and every day somewhere in the buildings here in Washington, there are a group of Republicans that are doing their level best to eliminate the one law that we've been able to put in place to control speculation. This is the Dodd-Frank legislation. The Dodd-Frank legislation has very powerful tools to control speculation. And you draw your own conclusions why our Republican friends would try to torpedo, to end, to eviscerate the Dodd-Frank legislation so that the speculators can continue this kind of activity. Now, keep in mind that this is not ended. If we go to 2010-11, the current period, my guess is that we would see something similar to this kind of speculation. So the Dodd-Frank legislation is the only tool we have available today to deal with speculations such as occurred in 2008 and is in all likelihood continuing today.
You know, an interesting point along the same lines, maybe 4 or 5 years ago, the percentage of speculation in the oil market was 30%. The speculators were involved in about 30%. About 70% were end users that were in the market. But interestingly enough, today, those numbers have just flipped. So that the end users of gas, of gasoline, that are betting on the future are 30%, and it's the speculators that are 70%. The other thing that the experts had said this morning, I don't know if you were there at the time, they were talking about Katrina. When Katrina hit, it blew out all of those oil rigs in the Gulf. It shut down oil production for a period of time. And you know what happened to the price of oil? It went from $50 a barrel to $60 a barrel for about 4 months, not from $70 a barrel to $147 a barrel. So over 4 months, it went up ever so slightly, but significantly nonetheless, and then it came down. So this is ripe for an investigation, I believe, because it would suggest that there's a lot of speculation going on in the market today.
I was there for that, and I was struck by the very same statistic. As you look at what happened then, $10 here, a doubling in price, consider for a moment what it would mean to somebody that had purchased back here in March, I don't know, 1 million barrels of oil at $70 a barrel. And they come up to July, that 1 million barrels of oil has doubled in value. So this is why speculation occurs. It occurs because somebody, by playing the market, by speculating, is able to make a vast sum of money. There's the other side of that coin. Somebody lost a vast sum of money coming down here. The American public, however, was the single biggest loser in all of this because as that went up, the price at the pump also went up. And Americans paid more and more for the price of gasoline. It was about $5 a gallon when it came up here. And it didn't go down from 147 to 32. That proportion didn't happen. It did drop from near 5 down to 350 in that area. So the American public was stuck with an exceedingly high price that continues to this day, which leads to those extraordinary profits that you were showing just a few moments ago. Now, I'm not saying the oil industry was involved in the speculation, but I will say this. The oil industry benefited from the speculation that left a very high price for oil into the future. This didn't last very long. This went back up to 70, and today it's over $100 a barrel. So we need to consider all of these things about what's going on in the oil market. Bottom line of this is we need to change. And this is, I think, where you want to go. You want to talk about conservation, and I'll lead you. You're the leader here. Take us where you want, and I'll follow.
So let's talk about what the solution is to protect Americans from the volatile gas prices and to kick our dependence on foreign oil. That becomes the secret. I mean, by every focus, if we kick our dependence on foreign oil, we are going to be so much better off. So let's look at this, this next chart. In 2005, America's dependence on foreign oil peaked at about 60%. And then it dropped down in 2010 to 49%, and then last year dropped down even more to 45%. 2010 marked the first time U.S. dependence on foreign oil fell below 50% in 13 years. And our dependence on foreign oil is now at the lowest level in 16 years. At this rate, Energy Information Administration predicts that the U.S. will slash its dependence on foreign oil to as low as 36% in the year 2035. The U.S. transportation sector consumed nearly 5 billion barrels of petroleum in 2009, accounting for over 70% of consumption in the United States. The lion's share of that, 45% of total consumption, was in passenger vehicles and light-duty trucks. So, what do we do about that gas guzzling that's going on? Well, the thing we do about that is to look at how we can change how many miles to the gallon we get. And to the President's credit, his administration has put in place these new corporate average fuel economy standards, known to all of us as CAFE standards, that will nearly double the efficiency of the U.S. fleet of automobiles, achieving a fleet-wide average of 54.5 miles per gallon by the year 2025. So what does that do once we get there at 2025? Well, it means that we as consumers will save $1.7 trillion at the pump over the life of the program. A family that purchases a new vehicle in 2025 will save $8,200 in fuel costs when compared with a similar vehicle in 2010. So over the life of the program, the standard will save 12 billion barrels of oil and eliminate 6 billion metric tons of carbon dioxide pollution. So the solutions are really there for us. The solutions are that we move to these CAFE standards, that we address the issues around speculation, and that we keep the robust drilling that is going on in this country right now so that we can continue to reduce our dependence on foreign oil.
Well, I took a look at that before we began this hour, and I go, oh my, do I have to wait until 2025 to buy that vehicle? No, not really. There are pure electric vehicles that are available today that get not 54 gallons per mile, but like infinite. They're using electricity only. You can buy those. Unfortunately, for me in my district, where a Saturday run around the district is 600 miles, doesn't make much sense yet. But it's coming. It's coming. The battery technology is improving for automobiles. You could store that energy or take down that energy at night. This is part of the electric grid and the changes that are occurring in the electric grid all across this nation. Given the low price of natural gas today, just over $2 a 1,000 BTUs, we are able, or we're seeing, the electric utility industry shifting from coal to natural gas. And as they do that shift, we get an enormous reduction in the carbon emissions, which is good for the environment and good for the climate change issue. And simultaneously, we're able to then see a path to an electric vehicle, or at least a hybrid, plug-in hybrid electric vehicle. All very, very good. Biofuels will be part of that also. So it's very, very powerful that we continue to increase. And let's keep in mind that there had been no increase until the Obama administration came in. I think it was over 20 years that the standards had been in place. And then President Obama came in and said, listen, we need to move to conservation. And the result is the incredible savings. I don't want to wait till 2025. Let's do something about it today.
Well, we can certainly try to encourage it. Let me, I don't know if you have any more thoughts.
I got a couple more things that I'll pick up along the way. Let me just share one of them since we're on the gasoline issue. You and I go back to our district every weekend, and a month ago, 2 months ago, the rage was the price of gasoline, and I was doing town halls. I knew you were also. And so I was doing some research about where gasoline is and what it's being used for and what the cost was. And I came across a statistic from the Energy Institute, Information Institute, that was absolutely surprising to me. And the talk on the radio and on television, and the talk radio, talk television, was that we have this enormous shortage of gasoline, that the threat of a war in Iran was responsible for driving it up, and somehow problems in Nigeria or Venezuela or wherever were somehow shorting the market, and that gasoline was in short supply. But the information, the statistics, were exactly the opposite. There was a glut of gasoline in the United States, so much so, get this, so much so that the oil industry, Chevron, Exxon, BP, all of the rest, were exporting 28 million gallons of gasoline a day. And at the same time they were exporting, they were driving the price up towards $5 a gallon. You go, well, wait a minute, what's this all about? You're telling me we have a shortage? If we have a shortage, why are you exporting 28 million gallons of gasoline a day? And from the information I've been able to obtain, it appears as though that export continues to this day. An export of 28 million gallons of gasoline a day out of the United States, at the same time that the industry is saying, oh, woe is us, we have a short supply. Well, if it's short supply, it's because they are creating it to the deficit and to the harm of the American traveling public, who has to buy that gasoline. Now, one other thing, and check me on this, I was trying to recall all of the information this morning, that in the last quarter of 2011 and the first quarter of this year, the United States, for the first time in, help me here, 40 years?
60 years.
60 years, was a net exporter of oil, a net exporter. We had achieved energy independence. We were exporting more than we were importing for the last quarter of last year and the first quarter of this year. I don't know if that's going to continue, but it flies right in the face for what the oil industry was telling us as the fake, false crisis of the spring occurred. My guess is it was speculation. My guess is it was greed on the part of the oil industry. And my guess is that, not my guess, my solution is to end the subsidies, bring that money back and use it on the green technologies and conservation. My solution is to enforce the Dodd-Frank laws and to make certain that the speculators are not robbing the American people day in and day out. Those are two things we can do, and as you said earlier, we will continue to produce energy in the United States, and we'll make it in America. I thank you so very much. I do have another meeting I'm going to have to run, but this is good. It's good to get the information out there, and thank you for bringing us together tonight.
Well, thank you, Congressman, for your great presentation and your passion around making it in America, which it should be underscored, because one of the great things that happens in my district is a lot of innovation. And Tesla, which is an electric car company that is making it in America, building it right there in Fremont, has a showroom right outside my district. And a gentleman came in to test drive the sports, the Roadster, which is, you know, has a hefty price associated with it, but very fast. And
is this the one that goes a gazillion miles an hour in 5 seconds?
Yes, it goes very fast, and it's all electric. And so he took it for a little spin, came back and says, I want to buy it. And the salesperson says, well, you know, you're the first person who's ever come in here and literally bought it after just a test drive. And the gentleman, the purchaser, said, well, my neighbor on one side and my neighbor on the other side has already bought one. Now, the funny thing about that story is not the keeping up with the Joneses so much, but the fact that in terms of the grid, having 3 electric cars on the same block charging overnight is going to create a little indigestion. So that's one of the good problems that we're going to get as more people are driving electric cars.
I was going to head out the door, but your Tesla story caught me as I was about to leave. And the grid, we need to have a smart grid. And we need, and this is one of the things that is in contention here, this is about energy research. Now, we need to understand how can we make that grid smart enough and robust enough that we will be able to charge on any given block 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or 6 or more homes at night. To do that, we need to have research and understanding not only how we produce the energy in an environmentally sound way that reduces the carbon emissions, but we also need to know how to distribute that power and when it's going to be needed. That's called the smart grid. Now, to do that requires research. It requires us to invest in research to understand how the grid works, how it can be improved, how we can create the efficiency in the grid, how that power can be distributed to where it is needed, when it is needed. That takes money. The federal government has, over the last several years, provided that research money in the budget that we're debating here now. Well, we're not debating it. It actually passed. The blueprint for the current budget from this House reduces the energy research in the United States. So it may be some time, if our Republican colleagues have their way about energy research, before those 3 people will be able to plug that thing in at the same time at night.
Let's hope we do it sooner than later so that they can be driving their Tesla Roadsters.
Thank you so very much.
Thank you. And I think at this point we have covered all of the issues we wanted to cover during this special order tonight. And I just want to leave my colleagues with this message. Again, this was quoted in USA Today. Citigroup analysts declared in a recent report, energy independence in the United States is not a pipe dream. The U.S. is already the world's fastest growing oil and natural gas producer. Counting the output of Canada and Mexico, North America is the new Middle East. We've got many exciting things happening in the oil and gas industry. And with that, Mr. Speaker, I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back. Under the Speaker's announced policy of January 5, 2011, the gentleman from Illinois, Mr. Holmgren, is now recognized for 60 minutes as a designee of the Majority Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent that all members may have 5 legislative days in which to revise and extend their remarks and include extraneous material on the topic of my special order.
Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, it is with mixed feelings that I come to this body tonight, and we'll have many of my colleagues joining me over the next hour to remember someone who had a huge impact not only on this city and on this nation, but on our world. A gentleman who had a very personal impact on my life, who passed away on April 21st, 2012, Charles W. Colson. Chuck Colson, as many of us knew him, was a very intelligent man, a very well-spoken man, a passionate man who served people, who looked for ways to honor them, recognizing the value of every single person. His life dramatically changed through a circumstance that he went through by going to prison. And I'm going to pull out some information here. We were honored to have a service today, a memorial service at the National Cathedral that was a memorial in remembrance of Charles Colson's life. Charles Colson was born on October 16, 1931 in Boston, Massachusetts. He graduated from Brown University. He served in the Marine Corps, went to law school at Brown, and then went on to practice law. And at a very young age, in 1969, while he was under 40, he was selected by President Nixon to be special counsel to the President and served directly under the President from 1969 until 1973. During that time, he was known as a very tough guy, He was known as Richard Nixon's hatchet man, and was very intelligent, understood policy, understood politics, understood how to get things done. Very driven, very focused, very tough. So he used his Marine Corps background, his tough upbringing in Boston, and his sharp intellect to be a huge impact for President Nixon. Well, he was also in that time involved peripherally with Watergate, and through that he felt that he was called to be honest with his involvement in there and pled guilty, entered a plea of obstruction of justice, and was sentenced to serve time in prison. And it was really as he was preparing for that time in prison that he started to examine his own life and to see what he had done, why he had done it, and what life was all about. And it was really through a writer that he had read, a book that had been given to him, a book by a great author and great thinker, C.S. Lewis, Mere Christianity. And through that book and through the testimony of one of Chuck's good friends, that Chuck Colson came to see his own failings, his own sin, his need for a Savior, and his need for a change. And it was really in the friend's driveway as they were talking that he heard his friend's testimony of what Jesus Christ had meant to his friend, and the floodgates just opened up. All of a sudden, Chuck Colson understood the fact of his need for a Savior, the fact that he needed to turn his life around, that he was going to have to pay a heavy price for his involvement in Watergate, that he was going to have to leave his friends and family, his young children, his wife, to go to prison for a long period of time. He wasn't even sure how long it was going to be. But it was that night in that driveway that he gave his life to Christ. And from that time on, before he entered prison in the early 70s, through his death here in 2012, Chuck Colson was an incredibly faithful servant of his Lord and Savior Jesus Christ. But more than that, he also was a servant to the least among us. He never forgot that service, that time in prison while he was there, and seeing the conditions that prisoners suffer under, the fact that we are all of incredible value, not because of what we've done, not because of what we know, not because of how much money we can earn, but because of how we have been created and the sacrifice that has been given for each and every one of us. He saw that, and he never forgot that. And so through this time, we're going to talk about much of his life since that time of going to prison and coming out of prison. As he came out of prison, he had opportunities where he could have gone immediately back into the private sector after being one of the chief people in the White House. He certainly had many connections, could have had a seven-figure income coming out of prison, but he decided not to do that. Instead, he decided to start a ministry to fellow inmates. And it was from that start that literally hundreds and hundreds of thousands of inmates, millions of inmates around the world have been impacted by the ministry of Chuck Colson and prison fellowship ministries and many, many other ministries that have come out of that. Angel Tree is another one that I'll talk about a little bit later on, of serving the victims of crime that we don't talk about very often, and that's children of inmates, unintended victims. Angel Tree is a service, a ministry that provides gifts to kids of parents whose parents are in prison. Wonderful ministry that's provided gifts to millions of young children around the world. So I am so honored tonight to be able to recognize, to honor, to talk briefly, and to share this time with some good friends of mine, and to be able to talk about someone who had a huge impact on my life, Chuck Colson. And at this time, I'm going to do you want to say a few words, Steve? Do you want a few more minutes? I'm going to hand it over to my friend Steve Pierce in a few minutes here. But very personally, let me talk about the impact in my connection. I had known about Chuck Colson for the last 25 years or so, 30 years, through many of his books. He's written well over 25 books. He's been a speaker around the world. He has had a weekly radio show called Breakpoint that would talk about issues that were going on in the world and really a Christian worldview to addressing issues that we were facing here. But throughout all of his books, all of his speaking, all of his literature, every time that he was talking, it was a connection that he cared for people. He loved people. One of my favorite stories that I hear over and over and over again about Chuck Colson is as he would travel around the world and travel into the worst of the worst prisons, that he would go in there and meet with prisoners. Oftentimes the warden wouldn't even go into some of these areas and meeting with prisoners. The wardens of these prisons would be afraid, and yet Chuck Colson would go in unarmed, without guards, right with him, but would go up and meet with the prisoners, talk with them, touch them, hug them, and just interact with them and let them know that he was going to continue to be thinking about them, praying for them, caring for them, loving them, and that he would be back. That made a huge impact on my life. Reading many of his books, he often talked about what is our role in government and how should we view the challenges sometimes that we see of, as Christians, how should we be involved in government? And he talked very clearly about that, of respect of government, but also the importance of everybody from all faiths to be involved in government, to recognize that this is our responsibility as citizens to be engaged and involved in the political process. So I had learned much about Chuck Colson through his readings, through hearing him speak, but had a wonderful opportunity a couple of years ago. I heard about a program that he did, that he had started up about 10 years ago, called the Centurion Program. And what this is a program that Chuck Colson and Prison Fellowship Ministries puts on. It's a year-long program of study, of seminars, of training, of really talking about how to be involved in our country, to be involved in our government, to make an impact in our communities. And so it was involved of dozens of books that we read in a year, going through what impacts our culture, looking at movies, looking at music, looking at government, looking at education, every single sector, and then we would come from all over the country out to Washington, D.C. 3 times during that year to spend a long weekend together where Chuck Colson personally led those seminars along with wonderful speakers from, again, around the country, coming to train men and women from all over the nation to be more effective in their communities, to be more effective in their families, to be passionate about using their gifts to impact others for good. And I was privileged to be selected to be a part of the Centurion Program in 2009 and went through that year-long process. Little did I know at that time, honestly, that I would have the opportunity to serve in Congress. This is before I even considered the idea of running for Congress. But it was really through that program and through much that I had learned that I was brought to starting to think about this, to pray about it, to talk to my wife, to talk to my family, to talk to my kids of how important this is and what a pivotal time in our nation that this is right now. And so it was much through the impact that Chuck Colson had on my life and that ministry had on my life that I decided to run for Congress. And I was so excited to have Chuck Colson here in the Cannon Caucus Room just several months ago to be able to meet with members of Congress and to make the connection again. I had spent so much time with him in that year, but hadn't had a chance to really connect with him since I had been elected to Congress. And he came up to me and gave me a big hug and said, "I am so proud of you." And he wrote me a little note just saying again of how excited he was and how he wanted me to continue to be faithful in all that we had been studying together and learning together, but continued to challenge me. And we talked about how we were hopefully going to work together for many years to come. Unfortunately, with his untimely death, it was a very sudden death where he was speaking before a group of people and had a dizzy attack, and within a short period of time had a blood clot in his brain that had an impact there. And over weeks, they tried to do everything that they could to save him and weren't able to. Unfortunately, we won't be able to continue to work with him, but his legacy lives on in me and so many others, literally millions of others around the world that he touched. And so that is what is such a privilege for us to be able to honor him tonight. Very, again, direct impact that he had on us. And really, before that chance I had to get to know him more personally, part of the impact that he had was the studies that I was doing. I was involved in our state legislature back in Illinois, and my wife and I had our 4th child, and we're trying to think of a good name for our new son, and we decided together that we would name him Colson. We call him Cole, but his name is Colson, named after Chuck Colson. And so it's such a privilege and a reminder all the time as I'm with now my 8-year-old little boy, Colson, of the legacy that he has and the big shoes that he has to fill, and really the power that his name means to me of a man who had a huge impact on my life. So again, we will take this time over these next minutes to honor a man that we could spend days talking about. But again, I'm so privileged to have my colleagues here tonight. And I'm going to turn it over to my good friend from New Mexico, Steve Pierce.
I thank the gentleman for bringing this issue up before the House. You know, it's rare that a person can impact your life in a very strong way. It is almost never that a person can impact your life in a very strong way on different ends of the spectrum. In 1970, I graduated from high school or from college. I'd drawn a very low draft number earlier in my college career, had joined the Air Force ROTC in order to avoid going to Vietnam in the middle of my college career. But as an ROTC graduate, I then had an obligation to go to pilot training, attended pilot training, and then went overseas, was assigned to C-130s. We were stationed in Clark Air Force Base in the Philippines, but most of our missions were in Vietnam. For the next year and a half, that's where I was. On one particular mission there in that time of 1971 and 72, I was a co-pilot flying into Cambodia. Now, at that time, we were supposedly not going into Cambodia. We were supposedly not going into Laos. But we were in and out several trips that day. That evening, when I got back to the BOQ, to the quarters there at Karrat Air Force Base, I think is where we were stationed at that time for 2 weeks, I was interested to see that President Nixon was on TV, and the camera zoomed in very close to him, and he described that American soldiers were not in or around Cambodia, that mission was not one that we as soldiers were fulfilling. Now, having just been in and out around Cambodia the entire day, that struck me unusual that a president would say things that were completely untrue that I knew to be untrue. In my heart, I began to believe that he could have said, I don't think the American people have a right to know. He could have said it's secret, that's classified information. But he came out with the camera looking him square in the face and said we were not there. Now, maybe he did not know. I'll give that. But when I got back to the U.S. and had found out about Watergate, that was beginning to unravel. The idea of who to vote for in those 1972 elections was ever present on my mind. His opponent, there was no chance I would vote for him. His opponent was Eugene McCarthy. I would not vote for there, but I ended up filling my ballot out that neither man is qualified or deserves this office, and did not vote for president that year simply because of my personal experience. And then watching this whole problem with the Watergate, Chuck Colson, Haldeman, those guys that were inside of the plumbers, began to give me a sense that this was a very bad point in my life, and Mr. Colson was a part of that group that was willing to mislead a nation, was willing to say things that weren't true. At the end of the day, President Nixon, as you know, stepped down, gave up his office because of misdeeds that the small group of them pulled together. Now, it was that background that I knew Chuck Colson for most of my life. Then in 2003, when I arrived here at the Capitol, being first elected to the U.S. House of Representatives, I started going to just a very small lecture series, and it was hosted by a gentleman named Chuck Colson. It didn't take long to make the association, but he was bringing in some of the best Christian worldview thinkers in the entire country. And I was able to experience Mr. Colson in a far different way than that remote acquaintance that I had made in the early 70s. In this way, he was one of the most compelling thinkers in the country. It was him that said that he lived in the dark until he saw the light. It was him that committed himself to a different view of the world, one that said that we must have redemption, we must have a Savior, that there is no hope for us as human beings if we are not to deal with those problems that each one of us faces in our lives. As he began to develop his insights and began to be one of the premier organizers of the Christian worldview, bringing in literally people from around him, he established his pillars for glorifying God through the works that we do. Those pillars are, number one, prepare well. Number 2, keep an eye on the horizon rather than up close to you. Number 3, engage and enlist others. Number 4, run assessments. Number 5, seek the abiding fruit, not just that is temporary. And finally, have guidelines that you have applied. It is in those principles of glorifying God that Mr. Colson really developed a presence that affected the world and affected my life significantly. He began to compel those of us attending this lecture series in this House of Representatives in one of the rooms beneath us, to compel us to enlist those around us, to be a light that shines out to others, to let our life be different, to let our lives be the equivalent of salt and light, which are rubbed, so to speak, into the fabric of the American mindset, so that those around us will know that they have embraced a lie. It was Mr. Colson who told me the most dramatic thing. His perception was, and I believe it still, the greatest problem facing America, he said, is truth. We don't know the truth in this country anymore. It's not revered. As we don't know the truth, then we see the fragments of society beginning to come loose around us. I hear my own daughter and grandchildren say, well, which side is right? They're all saying different things. When we as a nation walk away from the concept of truth, when we as elected officials fail to honor our obligations to speak the truth as we know it, when our courts declare that there is no truth, then the nation truly does suffer. And he made that extraordinarily clear and lived it in his life. And it's at that point that I began to be compelled that I should be more honest and transparent in my own faith. Not that I would go out and be interrupting people, thrusting myself into their consciousness, but that they would look and see there is something different. They would say, maybe we can trust that viewpoint. And so it is with sincere appreciation to my friend who is honoring Chuck Colson with this time tonight, because I believe that the nation has lost one of the premier thinkers, one of the premier people who would guide us along a path, who would give us a wake-up call saying that we must find that salvation. We must find that way back when things have gone wrong. And he was speaking from his experience of having gone so desperately wrong at a young age, being upheld and lifted into the very White House in this country, and having stumbled so badly. He could speak with experience, saying, we all have to come back. There are things that every single one of us slip into that eventually we're going to want to change course. And so it's through his example, through his words, through his values, through his ideas, that I know there are many here in this Congress who lived a different life because of those ideas. He came to New Mexico a couple of years ago. They had a large conference on the weekend. And again, I remember the same clarity, the same professionalism, the same looking toward the horizon there at that conference in New Mexico as we heard in this building here. He was a constant. He was refreshing to speak so openly about his problems. He was never able to let them loose, never get away from them, never get that stain off of him. But he embraced that, yes, that's who he was, and now he was different, that he had lived in the dark until he had seen the light. Each one of us, if we were to make those same understandings and give those same acknowledgments, I believe would live better, more transparent lives, with truth being a greater part of that life. And I think the nation would be better off for us living as it is for him having lived. We mourn his passing, but we also glorify God that he was placed into our midst, that he might truly shine the light of truth into the darkness that he found around him. I'd yield back to my friend, and we'll stay around to hear what else we have, but thank you very much.
I want to thank my colleague from New Mexico. Thank you so much. And now I want to yield to my good friend from North Carolina, Mike McIntyre.
Thank you so much.